So we left off talking about Daniel 3 and the Nebuchadnezzar builds a golden statue, right? And he requires people to bow down to that. We looked at that for the most part, and we saw basically a couple of things, and this is also, he threatens that if you don't bow down to it, you get thrown into the fiery furnace. God protects Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then in the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar sees four men, one whose appearance is bright like a son of the gods, and so that's where Nebuchadnezzar meets, in a sense, the stone that is going to crush the statue of the kingdoms of the earth, including his kingdom. And so there's kind of that face-to-face that they have there. But just something just to, by way of review, you guys remember the significance of the Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue of himself. Why does he build a golden statue? Not just because it looks cool and that he wants people to worship it, but why does he build a golden statue? Think Daniel 2. Yeah?
Because in his dream there's a statue and the head of gold was meant to represent him.
Right, so he is in his dream that Daniel interpreted, he, in Daniel 2:38, he says, you are the head of gold, but there's other kingdoms coming after you, that your kingdom will not last. And Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to make my kingdom last. Everybody of every tribe and tongue and nation will bow down and worship me through this statue. Okay, so important language there for that tribe and tongue and nation, because the kings in Daniel will try to get this worship from every people group, and that's going to be important for understanding Daniel 7. So we see here that they obey God. God delivers them. There's that great passage where they respond in Daniel 3:16 through 18, where in 3:18 they say, 3:16 they say, God can deliver us, the God whom we serve. We will not bow down. We will not worship and serve your gods or this statue, Nebuchadnezzar. But he says, even if God does not deliver us, we still will not disobey God. Okay, and so what these men represent, Daniel and these three guys, is that loyalty to God, even though they would presumably die for that loyalty to God. And so that's what Daniel's about. It's in exile, sometimes that's the requirement, is that you may lose your life, but Daniel also has a theology of resurrection. So he says, look, you may die for loyalty to God while you're in exile. God's still in charge, and he can resurrect. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar has kind of a recognition of God at the end. Hey guys, let's pay attention. It's distracting. Looking at whatever you're looking at back there. He has a recognition or an appreciation of God, and he says, if anyone speaks anything offensive about this God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he dies. His house gets destroyed and made into a rubbish heap. So he says that this God is really powerful. Okay, so he says that now people are to recognize this God, but Nebuchadnezzar has not been humbled in a real way yet. Okay, so time goes on, and we get two stories that are paralleled back to back. Daniel is very organized. It's very symmetrical. Now, not all the stories, they happen at different times, so they're not like rapid fire. Daniel in the lion's den is when Daniel's old. Daniel 1 is when Daniel's young. Okay, so, and Daniel's not in Daniel 3. But this story, Daniel 4 and 5 are two parallel stories back to back, where we see in Daniel 4, great account of Nebuchadnezzar is humbled by God, and then his son Belshezzar in chapter 5 thinks he's awesome, and he's humbled before God. And so we see God humble these totally unaccountable kings who can do whatever they want. And Nebuchadnezzar It's interesting. The question here, I don't think we have a definitive answer on this, but I think we have some pretty good evidence. Nebuchadnezzar gets humbled in arguably in a saving way before God, where he finally turns and acknowledges God. And we actually have in Daniel 4, Daniel is written by Daniel, okay, which shouldn't be controversial, but some people argue about that. But there is somebody who either writes through Daniel or puts in his own writing here, and speaks in the first person, and that's Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar here writes or orates, speaks out, and somebody writes down Daniel 4, because it's from his own experience. So look at 4:1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of all peoples, nations, men of every language that live on the earth. And then it's like, here's me speaking, here's what I'm going to say. Okay, so he's going to talk about this again. And then look at Daniel. He speaks as I and me and in the first person. And then in Daniel 4:18 he says, this is the dream which I, Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Okay, so, and then he talks about at the end of Daniel 4, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, now recognize this. In Daniel 4:37, he talks about, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and honor God as the King of heaven. So he speaks in the first person here. So we have an account historically of, which is actually unique among, the Bible has a collection of unique historical literature that we don't have a lot of material like this historically. Otherwise, it's inscriptions on some stones, some tablets, some writings, but the Bible has preserved for us a lot of historical detail that we wouldn't have otherwise. And some people make up, they're like, well, the Bible's the only one that shares this story, there's no other evidence of it. And it's like, well, the Bible is historical evidence of it. It's like they want the Bible not to count for some reason. Obvious reasons. But anyway, so Nebuchadnezzar now gets humbled before God in this event where he has a dream. Okay, you look at 4:2, where after 4:1 he says, may peace abound. It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Okay, so we see now Nebuchadnezzar sounds different, right? Rather than my kingdom's awesome, I'm in charge, anybody who doesn't worship me, anybody who doesn't bow to me, I'm going to destroy it, I can do whatever I want. He's now saying God's kingdom is the kingdom that lasts. It's going to remain from generation to generation. And Nebuchadnezzar is okay with that. Look at 4:4. He says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease and flourishing in my palace. And then he has a dream. Okay, and let me just summarize what the dream is. And then he asks Daniel to come in, who's friends with him by now, and close associates. He asks Daniel to come and interpret this dream. His dream is that he sees this giant tree, and the birds come and nest in its branches. It has this sprawling branches. The birds come and nest in it. And then it gets cut down, okay, and falls over and is not able to be what it was. It becomes a stump, and basically Nebuchadnezzar is disturbed by this dream. And so Daniel tells him, he's like, okay, look, Nebuchadnezzar, this dream is, the tree is you. This tree is your kingdom. You need to humble yourself, because God is going to cut down your kingdom for 7 periods of time, for 7 years, if you don't humble yourself before God. Okay, and so he says in Daniel 4:25, just skipping ahead to Daniel's interpretation, he says, this is what is going to happen. to you. He says that you may be driven from mankind in your dwelling with the beasts of the field and given grass to eat like cattle and be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time, that's 7 years, will pass over you until you recognize the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Daniel 4:25 is key here, where he says, you're going to basically lose your mind, Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to lose your sanity, your ability to rule, and you're going to run away into the field, and you're going to eat grass like a cow. And you're going to live out in the land with the beasts, and it's going to rain on you, and you're going to basically live like a cow until... and your nails are going to grow long, your hair is going to grow long and matted, and you're going to be like this animal, and your sense is not going to return to you until you do one thing, and that is to recognize that God is the ruler, not only in heaven, but over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whomever he wishes. So until the requirement here, I'm just going to move this down, Nebuchadnezzar needs to basically recognize the sovereignty of God over human kingdoms. That God can bestow kingdoms on whoever he wishes. Okay, so that's what the point here is of this happening. Now Nebuchadnezzar he's told by Daniel. Look at Daniel 4:26. He says, and it was commanded that to leave the stump with its roots. Your kingdom will be assured to you after you recognize that heaven, capital heaven, which is referring to God, rules. Okay, so he says, look, your kingdom's going to be waiting for you. You're going to come back to it, but not until you recognize that God is in charge. Verse 27. Therefore, O king, may my advice be pleasing to you. Break away now from your sins by doing righteousness, and from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity. So Daniel says, repent, turn away from your sins, turn to doing righteousness, and God maybe will relent from doing this. And Nebuchadnezzar fulfills his own prophecy by not listening. He, 12 months later, 1 year later, as it says in 429, Nebuchadnezzar is standing on top of his palace, and he's looking at how great Babylon is. And he says, Babylon is really awesome, and I did this all myself. Can somebody read Daniel 4:30, Nebuchadnezzar's words there? Yes, thank you.
The king reflected and said, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? Right, so we see he's pretty prideful there, right? This is Babylon the Great. I have built it. This is mine. I'm in charge of the world. Okay, and so now in 431, says, while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you. The ability to reign and be in charge has been removed from you, and you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You will be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Same repeat of this idea in 25 is in 27. Okay, so now Nebuchadnezzar is going to lose his mind, and unlike being a man like Adam, who rules over the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, the fish, he is now going to be an animal. And a lot of times in Daniel, the kingdoms, like in Daniel 7, will be described like beasts. So Nebuchadnezzar now becomes
Instead of king, he is now a beast. He's going to go out and eat grass for 7 years. Okay, and so this is kind of that funny story, right? But this is what took place. And so he goes, and it's fulfilled, and he's in out there for 7 years long. Now, it's not like he's out there for like 24 hours or like a week or something like that. He's 7 years. Think about the fact that 7 years ago you guys were like 8, you know. So you guys were 8 or 9 years old, right? You know, so think of all the things that have happened in the last 7 years. So the kingdom kind of stays there, but Nebuchadnezzar is not in charge of it. But look at 4:34. Can somebody read Daniel 4:34 and 35? This is Nebuchadnezzar's change that takes place. Yeah, Jonathan?
4:34.
Yes, please, and 35.
At the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven. And the people of the earth, no one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done?
Okay, so now Nebuchadnezzar finally arguably repents. He changes, his mind is changed and his reason is restored. He says, at that time, I looked toward heaven, my reason returned, I blessed the Most High, I honored him who lives forever. And then he recognizes basically this: God's kingdom is eternal. Okay, and then also God is in charge in human history. He does, only God, this is in 4:34 through 35. Only God, Nebuchadnezzar thought he could do whatever he wanted, and in a way he could. But only God is truly the source of unaccountable power that only comes from himself. Only God has that ultimate authority, power, sovereignty to do whatever he wants. Okay? God is within his character, within his nature. I mean, there are things that God cannot do, like God cannot lie because it's contrary to his nature and character as truth. But God is the one who is ultimately the one who is free to act and to rearrange human history. And he says that, look, it's not just that God just does kind of what he wants in heaven and that down here on earth belongs to us. He says all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, meaning God can rearrange things in such a way that he brings about whatever he wants, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand or say, what have you done? Meaning, God, you answer to me and you tell me whether or not you should be allowed to do this. Right? And so Nebuchadnezzar realizes, God, I'm a king, but that's because God has temporarily made me a king. Right? And this is basically a big recognition from a king who could do anything he wanted. Okay? And it's a change that you don't see. You don't see this change taking place in Pharaoh. You don't see this change taking place in his son Belshezzar. You don't see this change taking place in multiple human rulers. But you do see it here in Nebuchadnezzar. And then look at the last verses of chapter 4. He says, at that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me. Meaning God gives it back, but he recognizes if God could take it away, God is the one who ultimately gave it in the first place. And he says, and my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. They came out to him. And so I was reestablished in my sovereignty. Surpassing greatness was added to me. And now... can somebody read Daniel 4:37, last verse of this chapter. Yeah, Melissa, thank you.
Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride.
Okay, first person there, he concludes, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise the God of heaven, etc. Okay, this is in 437. So he says, I'm a king, but God made me a king, and now I recognize God as ultimately in charge in the affairs of human history and in his own personal life. There's a little bit of different perspective on this, and it's hard to know exactly, but I think there's some good indicators here. What do you guys think? Is this saving repentance, or just Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, I recognize God's a great power, and has the ability to be in charge, but doesn't come to God in a saving way? Or is this saving repentance, where he says, now I do praise this God. I recognize God as the true God, and he is the king over all these things, and that he turned to God in a way that he becomes a believer. What do you guys think? Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I would need to see more evidence to prove that it was like full salvation, because right now, like, we don't quite know for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, there's like, what was the fruit of his life? And, there were other gods he worshipped, and, things he did. Not that God couldn't save him, but just that, we don't get a lot more detail on that. But yeah, okay, anybody else? What do you think? Nebuchadnezzar, did he turn to the Lord in a saving way, or was he just humbled relative to his kingdom, but not in a saving way? It's kind of like some people have this debate actually about the Ninevites. Jonah, did they repent savingly, or did they repent, and cease sinning to withhold the judgment of God? I think they repented in a saving way, at least many of them did, and God responded to that. Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, what do you guys think? You think he repented in a saving way? Melissa, what do you think?
I agree with Zach. It's hard to say, but if we were just going off of the language, assuming whoever he was dictating to didn't change anything, language used, sounds like he definitely respects God enough to be saved.
Yeah, so maybe, it seems a big change of heart here, at least. So, but yeah, so we'll see. I don't pretend to know exactly what was going on. He's probably dictating it to Daniel, and so Daniel probably wrote this down, or he wrote it himself. But that's a pretty big deal for a king of this time. Who the kings, remember, like Pharaoh, are recognized as gods. And so for a king like this to say, and they worship other gods and all this stuff, but for him to say, I recognize God is in charge of my kingdom and in charge of me is a pretty big change for somebody in his position. But anyway, now there's another king, his son, Belshezzar, gets humbled. Okay, in chapter 5. So you could imagine if you were you were a believer living in exile in Babylon during this time. Daniel, writing down and sharing these stories and these visions, is showing that while you're not in the land, while you don't have the temple, while you don't have the Davidic kingdom, God is still in charge and he's still working. God is still king. God is still sovereign and his kingdom is still coming about. And God is still in charge of these guys. Right? He was the one who brought them as judgment to bring about the exile in the first place. Recently, you turn off that game. And so he's in charge of when and for how long that they're going to be kings, right? So and so he's able to intervene. He can take Nebuchadnezzar like that and make him eat grass. And then 7 years later, bring him back. And so you could imagine the encouragement that hearing something like this from Daniel would be to the people during this time. Because they're like, oh, okay, God is still in charge. We just need to continue to be faithful to him like Daniel and his friends are exhibiting. Okay, now in chapter 5, we have Belshezzar has a feast. Nebuchadnezzar dies and is removed, leaves the throne. Okay, and Belshazzar throws a great feast for himself. He's drinking in the presence of 1,000 people, basically. Okay, and it's important what he drinks from. But what, besides Belshazzar being humbled, what is the Bible story? It's a historical account, but the story that takes place here. Do you guys remember what happens with Belshazzar? He's having a party, and then all of a sudden something interrupts the party. Does anybody remember? We have an English idiom that means a phrase where we take from this, where it's like, this was the sign that something bad was going to happen. So he's having a party and then something interrupts him and terrifies him. You guys know? I'll give you a hint. Look what I'm doing. You guys see my hand? You guys remember the hand writing on the wall? You guys know this story? Okay. So he's having a party, and out of nowhere, a hand comes and writes on the wall. And he's, obviously terrified of this. And we talk about, I kind of saw, maybe I haven't heard this phrase, but we talk about the handwriting on the wall, meaning I could see the handwriting on the wall that this wasn't going to go well. That's an idiom that we use from this story. And so Belshazzar is having a feast, but you need to take note of the way that he's doing it. His feast is worshiping the Babylonian gods, but he's also disobedient like Nebuchadnezzar was with the golden statue, but he does it in a little bit of a different way. Can someone read Daniel 5:2? This is when they're drinking. Okay, and can somebody read Daniel 5:2? And we need to note the type of things Belshazzar is drinking from. Melissa, thank you.
When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Okay,
what is he drinking out of? What's his wine that he's drinking out of? Yeah.
The stuff from the temple.
The vessels from the temple, gold from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had taken out when he destroyed it. So, that's already an attempt to insult God, and now the God that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had recognized. Okay, so they're drinking from them, and then we also need to note what the way they drink and party from these other things. Can somebody read Daniel 5:4? Daniel 5:4. Caden, thank you.
They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay,
now that may not sound like much, but they're drinking wine, they're praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. What does that kind of sound like that we've already heard in Daniel that has to do with gold, silver, bronze, iron? Yeah.
The statue.
Right. So he says, look, we're going to praise the gods, and we're going to identify with these kingdoms that God said he's going to bring to an end, and we're going to say that that's not going to happen. Okay? So while this is happening, 5:5, suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing on the opposite lampstand, on the plaster on the wall. And the king saw the hand that did the writing. And the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. This is true fear. Okay, so he calls all the Chaldeans and the diviners. He says, interpret what this says on the wall. And that none of them can. They're like, we don't know what this is saying. We don't know what this is about. And so somebody finally brings up to him, there's a guy who your father recognized, that they said is in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and he can interpret these types of things. He used to do this for your father, Nebuchadnezzar, and that's obviously Daniel. Okay, so Daniel's older by now, and he's kind of not as recognized by Belshezzar. So he brings Daniel to him, and Daniel reads it. And when they say they couldn't read it, I don't think that it means they couldn't literally interpret what the words were. I think they didn't know what the words meant. Okay, so the words on the wall basically were this Aramaic phrase that says "mene mene tekel upharsin," which is like mene is like a numbering. A tekel is a weight or a scales, like that you weigh something out in. And then Perez or upharsin is the kingdom, is the idea of the kingdom being of the Medo-Persians. Okay, so Daniel interprets this, and he says basically, Belshazzar, God has determined that he's weighed you on a scales and you don't measure up to what is right. And now he is going to bring on you the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians tonight. So right at the height of Belshazzar's kingdom, he says that basically tonight your kingdom is going to come to an end. Okay, so tonight is the night that Babylon is over. Babylon will transfer power now, will lose power over to the next kingdom, the kingdom of silver, Medo-Persia. Okay, so he says, and you're going to die. And that's what happens. The Babylonians, the Persians come in that night. They sneak in under a wall. They slay everybody and they kill Belshazzar. So right at what he thinks he's at the top of his power, worshiping these gods, drinking the vessels from God's temple, worshiping the gods of gold, silver, iron, bronze, wood, and stone. He thinks that he's going to be victorious over the kingdom. And God says the kingdom is done. It ends tonight and it's transferred to now the silver. Is moved from the gold kingdom now to the silver kingdom. I mean, that shows, now look at, talks about in Daniel 5:30, it says, that same night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain, 5:31. So Darius the Mede, and this is probably Cyrus, okay, Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about age 62. Okay, Darius is more of a title, kind of like Pharaoh, or something like that. Okay, so the kingdom now transfers over. Okay, so Babylon is basically done. Medo-Persia who takes over, and so there's a transfer of power. Daniel by this time is older. Daniel may be in his, because he was probably about your guys' age when he got taken in Daniel chapter 1. He lives through about the 70 years of Babylon to the end, and he lives into the years of Cyrus, okay, which is the king of Persia. Okay, so Daniel's probably in his 70s, maybe 80s by this time. Okay, and so he's recognized as this older statesman, this older official who follows the Lord, who does what's right, and is competent in his job, not dishonest, not corrupt. And so they keep Daniel around, and they're happy with him. And Daniel is, it says in Daniel 6:2, one of the three commissioners of like the whole, he has kind of charge over the different regions of Persia. Okay, So Daniel is noted as unique, as helpful to Cyrus, as helpful to Persia and the government and all this stuff, but they can't find, and so people kind of hate Daniel for this. So in Daniel 6:4, they can't find any corruption in him, so they're trying to look for something else to get him, to kind of get him out of the way so that they can gain more power. Okay, Daniel chapter 6 is the most famous chapter in Daniel. This is Daniel and the lion's den. Okay, so this is later on in Daniel's life. Okay, the visions that Daniel has take place through different points of his life, so that'll be important to note. Okay, can somebody read Daniel 6:5? Can somebody read that? Daniel 6:5. Yeah, Jonathan, thank you.
Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for changes against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God."
Okay, so they say we can't find anything to get Daniel in trouble on. The only thing that we could use theoretically against Daniel is relative to what? What if they're going to try to trap Daniel on something? It's going to be what? Yeah. That he's going to obey God. Yeah, so they're like, if we could make it so that his obedience to God and his loyalty to God is in conflict with his loyalty to the Persian government or the gods of the Persian government, then we could get Daniel in trouble. Okay, so they go to King Darius here, and they say, let's have you make a decree. Okay, so this is going to be important because, and it's also important for you to understand this in Esther. Medo-Persians, they're a brutal empire as well, but they're a softer hand than the Babylonians. Babylonians are just like, we'll just use force. The Persians are a little bit more like, will kind of encourage the people to do certain things, but they also have a law system called the law of the Medes and Persians. And what's important to know about this law is that if a king makes a decree according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, can the king go back and change it? No, it's an unchangeable law, which can be good because it means that kings can't just be, totally arbitrary and go back and change what they've just said. But it also means that these kings will get themselves stuck, like Cyrus, and also like Ahasuerus or Xerxes and Esther. They'll make these proclamations, and then they will get themselves stuck in a position that they don't want to be in because they cannot change the law once it's been made. So they go to the king, and they basically argue that, you know what we should do, King, because you're so great. Look at 6-7. They say, King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdoms, prefects and the satraps, the high officials, the governors, have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes petition, that's a prayer, to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction, sign the document that may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. So they say, King, we want you to make a law for 30 days that people are only able to pray to you and petition to you. So it's a limited law, but it's an unchangeable law. So Cyrus goes along with this. But how is that going to get Daniel in trouble? Yeah.
He only prays to
He's gonna continue to pray to God. Yeah, and his pattern in Daniel is in Daniel 6:10. He prays 3 times a day, according to, I believe, Psalm 55. Morning and noon and evening will I pray. Right? You even hear this in places like Acts. I want to say it's like Acts 2 or 4. Peter talks about going up for the afternoon prayers, things like this. So Daniel is known for he would open his window toward Jerusalem and he would pray to God. Okay, so he didn't start praying all of a sudden to break the law. He was already known for a habit of praying to God. And Daniel's aware that this law is the case. And he doesn't stop, right? But now the threat is that they are going to catch Daniel in doing this and throw him into the lion's den. Okay, so he gets, so this takes place. They catch Daniel doing this, and Darius is upset that this has taken place because he didn't realize that this would affect Daniel. So he's like, oh man, these guys have now just caught Daniel, but now I can't go back on the law. He's in a dilemma. Okay, so basically Daniel, it says here let's see, so this is what they said to the king in 6:15. They say, recognize, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that the injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. You can't change this law. Okay, so the king is upset. He weeps for Daniel in 6:14. But in 6:16, the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, notice serve again is a word for worship, will deliver you. And so they throw Daniel into the pit with these lions sealed over him, and he's going to be in there all night. And they didn't feed these lions. These are lions that they would have in there getting hungrier and hungrier, and then all of a sudden they throw in a person and close him up in there. Okay, now Darius is up all night, worried about Daniel, and then at dawn he goes back, and in 6:20 it says, when he came near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke to Daniel and said, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, worship, been able to deliver you from the mouth of the lion? And Daniel answers back. And notice, it's kind of funny here. Daniel is not... we don't get this idea that Daniel is eager to get out. He stands there and has a conversation with Darius while he's still in there with the lions. So I don't know if he was like petting them and stuff, but I would have wanted to. I've always said I'm a big fan of cats, and so I always thought it would be fun. Like if lions and like big cats and stuff weren't dangerous, I always thought it'd be fun to like play with them and stuff, but and pet them and things. But anyway, so it says that an angel, shut their mouth. But listen to what Daniel says. He now kind of preaches a sermon from the pit, and he says in 6:21, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Right? So it's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar was turned into a beast. The kingdoms of the earth are beasts. But Daniel, kind of like Adam, has peace with the animals and dominion over the animals. He says, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, also toward you, king, I have committed no crime. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Then the king gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children, their wives, into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed their bones. So the lions are hungry, and they did eat right away. So they ate these people immediately. And then 6:25, it says, Then Darius the king wrote to all the... Now, notice the language here. All the peoples, nations, men of every language. Okay, keep in mind that phrase. People, nation, language. Who were living, and say, May peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. Here's the repeated theme of Daniel. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will be forever. He delivers and he performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And so Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay, so this is kind of where Daniel's, the last historical thing we hear about Daniel. Okay, so the point here is each king, God brings and moves kings, moves kingdoms, and they all come to recognize, in a good way or a bad way, God's in charge. His kingdom lasts forever. That's why I say the theme of Daniel is the kingdom and sovereignty of God. Okay, center chapter of the book. We don't have time to get into it today, but you need to know the most important center chapter of the book that everything moves to and out from is the vision in Daniel 7 of the one like a son of man. This is in Daniel chapter 7, okay, where this is the controlling vision of the book that will connect with the vision from Daniel 2. And this is the one where God shows how he will bring about and realize his kingdom on earth, and that it's all centered around his son, this one figure called the one like a son of man, who rides on the clouds, who establishes an eternal kingdom on earth in front of God the Father. And all the nations come of every tribe and tongue, and they serve or worship him. Okay, so this is God's ultimate victory, centered around this figure, the one called the Son of Man. Okay, so we'll get into this. But by the way, one quick note. What is Jesus' most common, when he speaks about himself, what does he call himself the most? He calls himself Son of Man, because he's tying into a few passages, but mainly Daniel 7. He's identifying as the Son of Man from Daniel 7. Okay, got to end there.